Fine, I'll do it myself. Thank you to our $5 patrons, Redbull4765, and Lord, and Sean. Another thank you to our $3 members, Connor Plays, and Redbull4765. And a very big thank you to our $10 patrons, Robbie Uchiha and iDemokami. And a very big thank you to our $25 member, Alex Ice Rose. Before having this breakdown / discussion on what the hypothetical domain expansion of Yuta Okkotsu could be, please remember to leave your own thoughts on what the domain could be in the comment section down below. Leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also hit that little notification to miss out on any videos that come to the channel. Also, I do have a Patreon down below. Use for as low as $1 a month. You get things like exclusive videos, early content, and more. Also, now become a member of the channel for as low as $3 a month to get the same perks and more. Now, let's hop into the discussion. What's up, guys? Welcome to you, and here we are to talk about the hypothetical domain expansion of Yuta Okkotsu, because I need it. KK, I need it. KK, the Yuta fan in me needs it, KK. But obviously, it's not going to happen, at least in my opinion, anytime soon, if ever. Like, notably, I think we all know what we wanted at the end of chapter 178, going into chapter 179. The triple domain expansion was one of the most hype things to ever happen. I'm pretty sure I lost a few years off my life and or gained a few years on my life based on how much hype was coursing through my veins at the end of 178. But of course, you know, Kurushi had to come in and ruin our fun and ultimately collapse the triple domain expansion, and thusly we didn't get to see anything. Like, legitimately, we see nothing what the domain even could have looked like. And notably, that wouldn't have even been Yuta's domain. That would have been Yuta's domain on top of Ryu's domain on top of Uro's domain. It would have been a mess. So I understand why Gege didn't do it for that reason. Number one, it would be a mess. Number two, obviously, I believe he's saving it for later, but like, who though? Like, because specifically, we already have another domain spammer in Hikari, in terms of like people who are going to need to see Yu's domain again and have special things in their domain that we don't fully understand yet. Like, Hikari still is a thing that we haven't gotten. So Yuta using domain later on in the series, it's possible, it's likely, but you know, just in case Gege decides to wiggle his fingers and just be like, haha, we're going to end the series this year without you ever seeing Yuta's domain, I'm going to give out 3 different examples to what I think Yuta Okkotsu's domain could be. One example would be safe. Balanced, kind of expected. I kind of heard variations of this idea left and right. Number 2 would be a slightly more fun variation of the domain, and something that could be a little bit more ooey gooey, if you know what I'm talking about. And number 3 is like, yes, it's broken. And I know Gege doesn't like characters to be broken unless their name is Gojo or Sukuna. So it's very likely not the third option. But the third option, in my opinion, is the most fun. But let's hop into the first option, the safest one, copy. Is Yuta Okkotsu's technique. So what would his domain be? Because you gotta remember, domains are essentially just a technique extended. They're the technique plus. The apex of Jujutsu really is your innate technique taken to the next level. We see this in pretty much every domain case. Malevolent Shrine, what is its main thing? Oh, it cuts you up a bunch. What does, I guess, Shrine itself already do? Cut you up a bunch. And maybe have fire? Who knows? You don't necessarily see that in Malevolent Shrine. But still, Malevolent Shrine is an extension of Cleave and Dismantle. Infinite Void, or Unlimited Void. What does it do? It stuffs you with infinity. Pause. Pause. But regardless, it stuffs you with infinity. Thusly, what is it an extension of? Gojo's Infinity. Though admittedly, it is a little bit weird. Like, I'll admit, out of all the domains, Gojo seems like the most disconnected from its original purpose, because like nothing that Gojo does in base has anything to do with information manipulation, but hey, whatever. Unlimited Void, an extension of the Limitless, and pretty much every other domain onwards is that, whether it be Naoya's domain, whether it be Dagon's domain, Jogo's, we don't know Hanami's, but even Mahito's, all of it is just the technique plus. So, what could the most base, simple, easy extension of copy, or mimicry as it's known, be? Easy. Yuta just gets to use all the cursed techniques he's copied unlimitedly, and that means for more than 5 minutes. Now, notably, I do think this is pretty boring, so I would add a little bit of spice to it and say that he can stack techniques. We don't see him do this in the fight against Ryu and Uro. He always switches one technique at a time. He never runs two simultaneously. But in this special domain scenario, considering a domain is simply an extension of what already exists of a cursed technique, and copy, at least at its base level without thinking about it too much, it doesn't necessarily imply anything extra fancy of what could be expanded to full domain territories, Yuta would literally just get to do everything at the same time. And note, this would make Yuta's domain not a sure hit. And I won't lie, that does seem a little bit weird. That does seem a little bit weird that the man second to Satoru Gojo in unusual abilities does not have a sure hit domain, but I do think the amp that he would get by being able to simultaneously use techniques on top of each other while within a domain, meaning he has his own stat buff on top of those combo techniques, means he'd be pretty much as lethal as a sure hit on his own. And presumably, if Rika manages to get into the domain with him, then she also would get access to all the techniques that Yuta has. And she would also still be feeding him unlimited cursed energy as long as the domain is maintained. And that's why hypothetically there would be two variations of the domain, one with Rika, one without Rika. Though considering it seems like Yuta's prerequisite for activating domain is Rika being fully manifested, I think unless the situation like 178 happens again where Rika is punched away and thusly cannot interact with the domain in time, I do think that Yuta jumping you inside his domain with all of his copy techniques would be dangerous enough to constitute a real domain. The only issue is I feel like this could kind of also be his maximum technique, but at the same time I think his maximum could be something completely different that I'll talk about in another video that literally needs its own thing. But what would be the weakness of this domain, right? Like, because obviously that seems a little bit too strong, right? Like, how can you really win against Yuta if he's literally hitting you with everything at once? As he's telling you to not move, he's hitting you with a thin icebreaker, as he's hitting you with a granite blast, as he's blood manipulating. Like, legitimately, he could literally do everything at once. How do you win? Well, it's how you beat Yuta already. Just have better stats and know how to counter the techniques. Now, I know that's like a really difficult thing to do, but remember, Yuta, while being extremely powerful, doesn't have the best speed, doesn't have the best strength. Well, apparently doesn't even have the highest amount of cursed energy. Like, legitimately, bro just doesn't have everything. Ryu was able to pretty much compete with him just by having higher AP. So thusly, what this domain gives is not just Yuta the ability to stack cursed techniques, but also gives the opponent the ability to just brawl with Yuta all over again. That's the trade-off for not having a sure hit. Sure, Yuta gets a massive amp, the ability to use techniques on top of each other with essentially no time limit, because he would be consistently fed cursed energy by Rika. Thusly, as long as the domain is up, Yuta is infinitely broken. The main thing you can do here is just out-hacks him. I'll box him. Notably, there are very few characters who would be able to do this, aka Gojo, Sukuna, maybe Kenjaku. This would be pretty hard for Kenjaku to beat. But the thing is, Yuta is supposed to be that powerful, and thusly giving him a domain that gives him pretty much unlimited access to himself and all of his abilities does seem appropriate in order to fit into the pretty much established archetype of domains just being the technique plus, the technique with extra, the technique with a little bit more. And to make this domain extra special, and to make sure that Yuta doesn't immediately get photorized by, let's say hypothetically, I'm assuming he's gonna fight Kenjaku, and if Gojo loses, I assume he's gonna be jumping Sukuna. What could make this domain extra crazy is that it's good in tug-of-war battles, but not for the reason you think. The domain doesn't have a sure hit, and thusly, there's nothing to cancel out if another barrier, or let's say a barrierless domain, were to be used against Yuta as he's using his domain. And thusly, as long as the initial barrier gets formed, or as long as there is a tug of war going on, Yuta still gets the stat buffs. Yuta still gets to use his techniques on top of each other. Yuta still has unlimited access to Rika. The only way to 100% make it stop is to do something extreme, like destroy the ring, or, worst comes to worst, destroy Yuta. You would have to execute him, or else he's just gonna keep rolling. It would essentially just be taking off the limiter and letting Yuta while out like he's in JJK0, but with a whole extra year of training, experience, and new techniques. That would be a way that you give Yuta everything that is required for Yuta. Second to only Satoru Gojo and unusual abilities? Yeah, once he's in domain, he has access to all of his unusual abilities, and that would pretty much make him second to only Satoru Gojo. On top of that, he gets a super powerful domain that's super good in domain battles, and thusly he would be able to continue to fight you with everything at his disposal like he was in his domain, even if he's clashing with you, which means he could have good matchups against people who are really good with their domains, like hypothetically Akari, like Kenchaku, like Sukuna, heck, even Gojo, though admittedly Gojo would, his domain sure hit effect, since there's nothing to really duel with it, would definitely still overwhelm Yuta. That's the thing. The reason I made this domain this way is because it's broken, it's cracked, it's the domain of a top 5 character in the verse, but it's not like so insane that it's just unbeatable, because we can see that Yuta's not unbeatable, and thusly he does need some sort of balancing. Even Gege believes that, and I still stand by the fact that Gege nerfed Yuta just for a balancing thing, for the narrative. If you're wondering why this certain thing didn't work when he would triple domain expansion, like say hypothetically if this were his domain, why didn't such a tug of war effect work in chapter 179? Well, the barrier didn't get fully formed, because, you know, Kurushi kind of broke in and messed it up. I think, let me see, hold on. Yeah, the second Kurushi did kind of just jack up everything, and plus 3 domains is complex, so yeah, whatever, we're just going to go with that, hypothetically, if this even were Yuta's domain. But like I said, this is the simplest, the cleanest, the easiest option. Is it super broken? Yeah, but I still think it could fit Yuta, the man of all, the blessed child of Jujutsu, if he literally just got to use all of his Jujutsu at the same time to beat you to death with Rika. And can you imagine if Rika had all the abilities of Yuta and you were still getting double teamed? But obviously it'd be a lot. It would be a lot for anybody to fight with, especially considering it would last even in a domain battle or beyond domain. But with that being the case, like I said, that's the safest option. Unlimited stacking. For a name for it, I guess you would go with Domain Expansion, the Blessed's Buffet, or something like that. I have no idea. You guys can come with a better name than I can. It's just the idea of he literally gets to eat everything, because he has everything all at once and he's jumping you. But let's move on to the more spicy idea, the more ooey gooey idea, the one that's definitely a bit more crazy, but I still don't think it's as crazy as the final one, and it is Domain Expansion, endless copies. And I ask you, what is Yuta's technique? Mimicry, right? Copy. And, you know, what is the main philosophy of Jujutsu Kaisen? Like, what is the series constantly renamed for due to its very famous number of lack of fair one-on-ones? Why does no one get the faith of one-on-ones in Jujutsu Kaisen? Because it's not Jujutsu Kaisen. It's actually Jujutsu Kaisen. So, what if, inside Yuta's domain, you didn't just have to fight Yuta, but you also had to fight Yuta, and Yuta, and Yuta, and Yuta, and Yuta, and Yuta, and or, this is the, because that may be a little bit too much, right? Like, oh, okay, wait, you're just gonna jump with a million Yutas? Yeah, that'd be one thing, that'd be maybe too much. The softer variation of this is that you get jumped by Yuta, and then Uro, and then Druve, and then Inumaki. And then essentially every single technique that Yuta has copied manifests itself within the domain. The more broken variation of this would be if they were all Yuta, but every single Yuta is one that has a different technique. Because one of the biggest things about base Yuta outside the domain is that he can only use one technique at a time, or at least that's so far what he's shown. Maybe he can just stack the techniques on top of each other, we haven't seen it, but I think he can only use one at a time. So to kind of fit into the original one where, oh, okay, an endless buffet, well, you just get to have all your techniques at once, but you're still essentially just fighting 2 people. You're fighting Yuta and Rika. That's about it. It's not too crazy. But something a bit more ooey gooey, a bit sticky wicky, is if you had to fight all the Yutas that had all the copy techniques. So there would be one Yuta with sky manipulation that's throwing out thin icebreakers and flying all around, going crazy on you. There's another Yuta that has Drew Shikigami technique, summoning the massive Shikigami, the little Shikigami and all that, canceling out your technique. Then there's another Yuta that's out there wielding her speech, throwing all kinds of different commands at you, telling you to stop, fall, crush, be perished, all that good stuff. Then you have another Yuta throwing out boogie woogie, mixing it up, left, right, up, down, all around the town, all that good stuff. Another Yuta using blood manipulation, firing stuff off, left, right, up, down, literally left, right, is that Chico? Legitimately all of that. And you have all those at once. So when you're fighting Yuta, you are literally being jumped by Yuta. And that could explain how the domain could function without Rika. Because what you would essentially get is Yuta would still be limited. He still would only be able to use one technique at a time. The real Yuta. But you aren't just fighting the real Yuta. You're fighting all the different copies of Yuta that have all the different abilities that Yuta has copied. And that is what makes the domain broken. Once again, this is not a sure hit domain. It still is not. You still could hypothetically dodge the Yutas. You could still hypothetically box the Yutas. But while I believe that, one base Yuta isn't all too crazy, what about 2 base Yutas? What about 3 base Yutas? And what about 4 base Yutas? Not with base Yuta, aka no technique or anything like that, but Yuta with sky manipulation, Yuta with cursed speech, Yuta with cursed tools, Yuta with creation, Yuta with tool manipulation, Yuta with all that good stuff. I'm saying Yuta so much it's losing meaning, but regardless, you get what I'm talking about. You get the same benefits of the original, where you have Yuta being able to use all of his techniques at once, but instead of it just being 1 body, or 2 in the case of Yuta and Rika jumping you, it's literally every single Yuta that exists. The reason I think that could be a little bit too broken is because, Yuta's very tanky, and thusly, even if you can do decent damage to Yuta, you'd be hard pressed to have, anyone beating 5 Yutas. Let's just go with the techniques that Yuta's confirmed to have. Just 1, Cursed Speech, 2, Drew Shikigami technique, and 3, sky manipulation. Fighting 3 Yutas alone is really, really difficult for anybody involved. And thus, I think that would be a little bit unfair. Now, imagine including all the techniques he hypothetically should have. He could now have Angel's technique. He should, for all intents and purposes, have blood manipulation. He should have Boogie Woogie. He should have tool manipulation. He should have creation. That's 8 different techniques that he could drop on your head right there. I may not be able to count. I don't think it's 8. Something like that. But legitimately, he could drop all that on you at once. That would be a little bit broken. So I think the auto nerf to this idea would be that you don't get to have 8 Yutas. You would get to have 8 users of the techniques. So 1 would be Kamo or Choso, whichever you think he got blood manipulation from. 1 would be Uro. 1 would be Druve. 1 would be Inumaki. And thusly, there's still some balance. And of course, it's simply the original Yuta. He could still use his technique, because once again, domains are essentially just a stat buff, except obviously all the techniques that he used will be compiled with all the techniques that the copies are using, and he can also still do everything just a bit more crazy and a bit stronger because he's in his domain and he gets the stat buff from domains. So this Yuta would essentially be able to jump you alone. And it gets even worse if Rika's in the domain too, because she's going to be jumping you as well. So this one is a bit more ooey gooey, a bit more sticky. It's way more complicated though, and thusly I think in a domain battle it'd be super duper weird. If it's all Yutas, could the other Yutas counter your domain with a second domain? What happened? How sentient are these Yutas? Are they all under Yuta's control? I think that would be the easiest way. Yuta can just kind of control them like the 6 paths of pain, and essentially you would kind of have that for either scenario, whether it's all Yutas or copies of the original users of the technique. Yuta could essentially just use them as a 6 paths of pain. So say you're boxing Yuta in a 1v1, you're throwing falls, fisticuffs, boom bop, boom bop, boom bop, then another person comes up the cut, let's say it's Shoso or Kamo, and they hit you with a piercing blood from the side. Yuta can also see that happening, but you're locked on Yuta. At the same time, someone's coming down from the heavens, it's Uro about the thin icebreaker, your dome piece wide open. So once again, not a sure hit at all, but almost as dangerous as a sure hit, because you're going to be getting spammed by a bunch of different techniques. And sure, an Inumaki clone using cursed speech alone, not too impressive. But when an Inumaki clone is using cursed speech as you're fighting for your life against Yuta, who's also using cursed speech, while Uro's trying to thin icebreaker your head, and Drew Shikigami are trying to eat you alive, and who knows, I think it's not all too crazy to say that Yuta should have Ryu's technique at this point, so you may be getting hit with a granite blast from legitimately, the stockpile of this domain could go crazy and be once again a really good matchup. And once again, since this isn't a sure hit technique, I think you could hypothetically slide in there the fact that these copies could be maintained if a domain battle were to go on. It's just to once again make it more balanced, the copies would be even weaker. So an Inumaki clone would be even less effective with cursed speech, essentially making it useless. But 50% power Ryu is still a 50% power Ryu. A thin icebreaker to the head is still a thin icebreaker to the head. You still get all that good stuff, and Yuta still does have, once again, somewhat of a domain counter. His domain is somewhat good in Tug of Wars, though it's not all too crazy. And also you get that nice balance where you have Yuta being able to do Yuta things, but not alone. Obviously, the more broken variation of the domain is all Yutas. Because can you just imagine fighting 8 Yutas at once, or just fighting 3 Yutas at once? That would be non-impossible, and the kind of jumps could be crazy. And notably, this isn't actually too outlandish. We do know for a fact there is another type of domain that allows you to spawn clones, and that's Chimera Shadow Garden, and that domain's incomplete. And those clones do seem to be just as strong as the original for Megami. So Gege giving a character the ability to clone themselves within a domain in order to utilize their abilities to an even higher level, not unheard of within JJK. It's not all too buku bonkers. So this domain, while it is a bit more outlandish than the base one, it's not so outlandish that I don't think Gege could do it. But once again, this is a more balanced. I can't really say it's balanced. Like, getting jumped by 8 Yutas would be crazy, or getting jumped by 8 people in general on your own in a domain when the main Yuta still has a bunch of stat buffs is super crazy. But Kenny would still slam. I'm kidding. Am I kidding? Would Kenny still slam? Maybe not Kenny, but Sukuna and Gojo would still slam. But with that being the case, we have the final domain option. The domain option that's a little bit silly, a little bit goofy, a little bit stupid, and unbelievably broken and dangerous, and I don't think this would work all too well, but let's talk about it. After I name the second domain, what would I call it? Like, would it be domain expansion, endless copies, or a Mimic's world, or the... I have no idea. Like a blessed false create. I'm trying to think of super duper dramatic names for a hypothetical domain name for the second one. I don't know. I'm gonna leave that one up to y'all. Whatever you think the second domain would be. For the way the domain works, you literally just get copies of every single technique that Yuta has, whether that be on actual Yutas and or just copies of the original Yuta of the technique. It's up to you. Just tell me what you would name that domain, because that one, I don't know. It's hard to think of a name for that. I think just endless copies would work, or like the copy world. It sounds so stupid though. Like I want a cooler name. I can't think of a cooler name on the top of my head. But the final domain, the domain that would be so broken that I don't think Gege would do it, but it would be cool if Gege did. Let me introduce you to the final domain. Domain expansion. Endless destruction. Okay, obviously you need to like throw in copy or something like that. But what is this domain? So, you know how the previous 2 domains didn't really have sure hits? Mainly because, like I said, copy doesn't necessarily have anything that immediately implies a sure hit effect. At least not in my opinion. When I think of a copy, like, oh, okay, what are you really gonna do with that in terms of like a sure hit function? But then I started thinking, and trust me, I'll do that very often. So when I started thinking, I was like, well, hypothetically, if you were to, I don't know, make a copy effect have a sure hit effect in a domain, then why not just let every single technique that Yuta has observed and understand and thusly could use have its sure hit effect in that domain? You may be wondering, what? So let's just say cursed speech, for example. Whatever the sure hit of cursed speech would be, if it had its own domain, Yuta would have that. And simultaneously, for sky manipulation, whatever Earl's sure hit was within her domain, Yuta would have that. For Ryu's domain, whatever sure hit effect his domain had, Yuta would have it. All the different sure hit effects that Yuta would hypothetically have if he were to be using any of the techniques individually with their domain expansions would be compiled in his domain. And thusly, it literally is like a patchwork of every single technique that Yuta has copied and understood and can utilize. Thusly, you aren't just getting torn apart by one. Say hypothetically, you could tank the sure hit effect of one. Let's say Yuta, after seeing Malevolent Shrine, knows how to use it, or something like that. Like, he gets the gist of it, and he can use copy, considering Kenjaku says, oh, he can just conditionally copy curse techniques. Alright. Then, say you are somehow able to tank Cleave and Dismantle, you aren't just getting hit with Cleave and Dismantle. Yuta, who should, for all intents and purposes, somewhat understand the Limitless, you're also getting your brain stuffed with infinite information. Uro, I'm not sure what her sure hit would be, but let's just say it's, hypothetically, Thin Icebreakers. Just over and over and over again. They just spawn on you. Earl doesn't actually have to hit you. You just get thin icebreakered everywhere. That would also be happening as you're being cleaved and dismantled and as your brain is being stuffed with infinite information. And on top of that, it doesn't stop there. You're also getting cursed speech. And instead of the cursed energy having to travel from the words of the user into your ears to do damage, the effects just hit you. So if you're meant to detonate, you're just going to keep detonating, and just so on and so on and so on. This domain would be essentially unstoppable and really, really unfair, and that's why I don't think Gege would ever let you to have it. Because this domain is essentially just an insta-win. Like, I'm not exactly sure how you beat this one. For the previous two, you kind of just have to have the stats or your own unique diversity of hacks or quality of hacks to outdo Yuta with, like, Omni hacks and Rico with Omni hacks. Like, you kind of just have to be able to beat that. It's reasonable. I think the top two could do it. I think if you stretch it really, really hard, Kenny could hypothetically beat the first domain, especially considering all the top three have domains that either hard counter through being barrierless and or just Gojo Satoru, the strongest. For the second one, and it's pretty strong. Like, I'd say dangerously strong. Like, obviously, hypothetically fighting multiple Yutas, pretty difficult for people to do. Fighting one Yuta is pretty difficult for people to do. But even just fighting copies of multiple users of curse techniques would be pretty dangerous, I would say. But still, once again, not unbeatable. Kenny could just drop 1,000 special grade curses. Maybe not 1,000, he probably doesn't have that many. But a bunch of special grade curses to take out the weaker copies, or just to stall the other Yutas, and then open domain on top of that to really just, guarantee that he could get a dub. Same thing with Gojo or Sukuna. But like, if Yuta opens this third domain and you aren't opening yours, you lose. You legit lose, because every single technique that Yuta has, even with just the ones that are hardline confirmed, straight up just curse speech, Earl's sky manipulation, and Drew's Shikigami technique. Those three alone are enough to really mess somebody up. Because let's say, once again, all three of these hypothetical sure hits for these hypothetical domains are, once again, all hypothetical. Massive emphasis on the hypothetical. But if you can just skip the effects of cursed speech needing to travel to the opponent's ears, and you just get spammed by effects, yeah, that's pretty dangerous. If you really are being thin icebreakered all over your body, so we are essentially becoming a shattered sky painting, yeah, that's pretty dangerous. Let's just say, for the sure hit of Drew's domain, you literally just get spammed and consumed by a bunch of different Drew Shikigami that are now Yuta flavored. Yeah, that's pretty dangerous. Essentially be Dagon's domain, but like stronger. And note, you're getting all three of those effects at once. Then imagine, just simply imagine all the hypothetical techniques that Yuta should have access to. I know, saying Yuta has the Limitless is kind of weird, but hypothetically he should know it. He should understand Cursed Spirit Manipulation. He should understand Boogie Woogie. He fought Toto. He should understand Creation. He fought Mai. Remember, Yuta soloed the whole Kyoto school in the previous year. That was a thing that did happen. So he should have blood manipulation. He should have tool manipulation. Heck, he may even have puppet manipulation, or whatever, what's his name's ability was. I completely forget his name. I'm sorry. I'm going to look that up because I know people will get mad at me that I forgot his name. Kokichi, his ability. He could have that too, hypothetically, because once again, he soloed all of Kyoto. He just did that. Panda's techniques, he should probably understand and be able to use, like, legitimately, Gojo and Sukuna's. Heck, Angels, he was there, he witnessed it, he could probably ask some questions. A lot could have happened in a month. Who knows what the heck a sure hit variation of Akari's domain would be. But that could be there too, because once again, Yuta seems to know how Akari... You hear that? You hear that? That's Gege trying to strike me down for making Yuta too broken. I'm sorry, bro. You shouldn't have given him the copy ability. I'm sorry. Aim better next time, buddy, because that wasn't it. But regardless, with that being the case, with all the abilities that Yuta hypothetically could know, maybe knows, hypothetically are in his kit, on top of the ones he already has, and then you give him a domain that gives him the sure hit of all of those abilities, that all hit you at the same time. Heck, even if they were on a rotation, like every single singular sure hit was a different technique, and like they weren't all compiling you at the same time, that's still crazy. One sure hit of cleave to the dome piece. One sure hit of thin icebreaker to your neck. One sure hit of Daru Shikigami technique to your leg. Like, legitimately, just all of that will be bonkers. And remember, this is a domain, meaning that Yuta doesn't just have to stand there and watch as you get jumped by a billion sure hits. Yuta can also just keep attacking you with his technique, or all of the techniques, as you're getting bombarded. That's why this domain would be a little bit money. Like, even from my perspective, like, I like the idea of it, because I believe, despite how much I've been slandering Yuta recently, Yuta should be broken. Yuta should be the cheat code of the verse. Yuta should be like, hey, you need to get nerfed, but not actually be nerfed. Like, he should literally be Brawl Meta Knight. Like, like, in my opinion, Yuta should be Brawl Meta Knight, where he is broken, easily broken, definitively broken, easily one of the best characters. Well, maybe not Brawl Meta Knight. What was a good Brawl character that wasn't Meta Knight? Regardless, he should kind of be like the Cloud of Smash, like Smash 4 Cloud of JJK. Not the best, not the strongest, but like so high up there that it's basically kind of that. And I think that domain provides that, the clearest out of all three. Like, it is super duper broken and would be nigh unstoppable for anyone to compete with. But once again, even with how broken this domain is, if Yuta gets opened up on at the same time, the sure hit effects are going to cancel out, and Yuta would just get the stat buff and what he can already do outside of his domain. So it wouldn't be too broken. All right. That's the counterbalance to this one. Though, if Yuta opens this domain on your head and you just aren't ready for it, you got caught lacking, then I'm sorry, bro. That's just like a G chisel. There's nothing you can do about that. You lost, my friend. My apologies. It's just business. When you deal with the Yuta, you get the Okkotsu. However, those are my ideas. Those are 3 domain ideas for Yuta Okkotsu. But what do you guys think? Do you think any of these domain ideas work? Do you think they are at all viable? Do you have other ideas of your own that you would love to see Gege use as Yuta's domain? Please let me know all that and more in the comment section down below. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Make sure the notifications to miss out on any videos that come to the channel. Also, I do have a Patreon down below, for as low as $1 a month to get like exclusive videos, early content, and more. Also, now become a member of the channel for as low as $3 a month to get the same perks and more. Now, thank you so much for watching once again, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day. This is Dago the Pencil, writing off.